I really hope I don't come to regret this. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today is February the 1st, which marks a very important day in my journey as a reader because it is the day I am committing myself to a week-long challenge in which I am going to, for the next 7 days, exclusively read Highlander romances. Now, if you haven't caught on from those few sentences, I myself am a Scot. I was born and raised in Scotland. It took me until I was about 25 to leave, and I currently live in England. Last year, in 2019, I developed an interest in the romance genre. I found myself really drawn to historical romances and appreciating a lot of what was out there. But there is yet one genre of romance or subgenre of romance I have yet to make my foray into, and that is, of course, the Highlander romance, because I am genuinely terrified of what I am going to find there. It has been so interesting, this romance journey from my perspective, and also discovering how large a subgenre the Highlander romance is. Basically, from what I understand, the Highlander romance is usually a historical romance. It could be the 16, the 17, the 1800s, what have you, where the male lead in particular is Scottish. And what I also think is interesting is that I have yet to find a Highlander romance written by a Scottish person. It seems particularly popular amongst authors writing from North America, I think that's fair to say. But I'm curious because I've also never really seen a lot of Scottish people review Highlander romances, so I want to know what I think. Now, I'm going in with a little bit of trepidation to this project. I do expect to roll my eyes at certain parts of the storyline, probably the dialogue, but I do want to enjoy these books. I don't just want to pick up like 3 books or so for the sake of hating them, so I'm hoping I will find something about them I like, and I'm hoping to read a few different ones to kind of discover if there's something I can enjoy in the Highlander romance, but equally I just think it will be interesting to get my own perspective on these stories. You know, I have a preconceived judgment and I want to challenge that, but because of that I also have a long list of things that I expect from these books, and I thought it would be fun before I get reading to tell you a little bit about what I'm expecting. Now, first up, I'm expecting all the male leads to have names like Douglas, Dougal, Duncan, Fraser, Callum and Connor, which in all fairness, about 50% of the boys I went to school with were called Fraser, Callum or Connor. So those are popular names, not so many Dougals, but that one will be interesting for sure. I'm also expecting all of their surnames to begin with Mick or Mach, and for them pretty much all to be lairds of Highland castles. Of course, but that's also something that's just quite popular in general of the historical romance. All of the men are often lords or dukes or barons or what have you. From the covers, I assume they are all going to be rugged, thick, muscular men who don't wear shirts. I always find it so interesting, the covers of Highland romances, because so many of them have men in kilts with a sash. And have you been and experienced the Scottish climate? Pretty sure they were wearing blouses at least. I'm also expecting, although I would rather not read about this, is that all of the Scottish male leads hate English people. I'm going to find that really boring if that's the case, so I am hoping that's not everywhere, but I did notice it in a few of the blurbs I was reading that. However, although I'm expecting those things, I don't necessarily think they will ruin the book for me. What I particularly find difficult when I do read books, because I have read books with Scottish characters in them that have perhaps not been written by a Scot themselves, and it's the dialogue. It's the casual use of Scots in the most odd places. So in my experience, what is often common is that the Scottish character, whether male or female, just speaks in absolute perfect English with the occasional I, ken or oh chucked in there, which is no. Nobody speaks like that. So that's kind of what I'm a little bit apprehensive about. And that's something I've seen before in series like The Parasol Protectorates by Gail Carriger, which is a 1800s alternative paranormal London story, but the male romantic lead is Scottish, and that's kind of how the dialogue goes, and it takes me out of the story, I'm not gonna lie, because it just seems so unnatural. Either someone is going to speak with like a reasonable amount of Scots filtered into their speech, or they're not going to use it at all. They're not just going to use exclusively the word ken. Like, I've never met anybody that speaks like that. But that's kind of what I'm expecting. What, however, will I be reading? Now, I did ask for recommendations on Twitter because I originally ran a poll to see if people actually wanted this video, and hundreds of you did, so I hope you are here enjoying this journey with me now. So some of the authors that came up were Lindsay Sands, Hannah Howell Murray, Elizabeth Essex, Jennifer Ashley, Sarah McLean, and Tessa Dare, whose non-Highlander romances I have read and really enjoyed in the past. Now, I don't want to go out and spend a ton of money for this video, so I'm also kind of just working with what I have access to via Scribd, my local library, and what I have around me in the house. So on that topic, I do actually own one Highlander romance. I know. This was very kindly sent to me for review a few months ago by Mills and Boom, and I've been meaning to read it, so this seems like the perfect opportunity. It is The Lord's Highland Temptation by Diana Gaston, so this will probably take precedence. I also have a book that I got for review off of NetGalley, which is called To Wed a Wild Scot by Anna Bradley. I don't really know what any of these books are about. I reserved a couple of Highlander romances in my library that they seem to have in their selection, which are A Healer for the Highlander by Terry Brisbane and Forbidden Night with the Highlander by Michelle Willingham. I've not gone and picked those up yet, but they are waiting for me. And on Scribd, I have saved a bunch of books by an author called Karen Hawkins, who has a ton of Highlander romances, including How to Abduct a Highland Lord, Sleepless in Scotland, To Scotland with Love. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an expert, but none of these look like real tartans. But that's basically what I'm working with. I will keep an eye out, again, like I said, on Scribd, NetGalley, in my library as the week goes on, and kind of chop and change as I see fit. What I will not be doing is reading Outlander. Never in my life. Sometimes people ask me to explain why I don't want to read Outlander, but I can't, because it's like a physical feeling. It's not logical. It's entirely like psychological, and I cannot bring myself to do it. So I will not be reading Outlander. Apologies if that's why you came to this video. However, I think that pretty much covers everything I needed to say in this introduction. So let's get on with what this video is really about, and that is reading the books. First step towards completing the challenge, which is get one of the books from the library. So now I kind of have my Highlander romance selection to pick from. They didn't actually have both of the ones I'd ordered in, but they had one of them reserved, not ordered, but they had this one available, and it's called Forbidden Night with the Highlander, and I think I'm just going to start here. I've got like an hour where I can just chill out in the flat, and I think I'm going to chill out with this. The back tells me that in this Warriors of the Night story, Lyanna McKinnon seeks to avoid her betrothal to a Norman lord by giving herself to an intriguing stranger, but afterwards she discovers her sensual lover is none other than Rhys de Laurent, her betrothed in disguise. They've already had their wedding now. Now there's no escaping their marriage vows. Interesting. So I didn't really think about it, but that means this one's quite like early historical period. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so Scotland, 1171 is when this book is set. That's actually quite fun because I've never really read a book set in the 1100s. I'm quite enjoying that. Plus, if you didn't know, my surname, which is Mingus, that's how you pronounce it, comes from the Normandy. It's like a really old Scottish clan name, but because there was a lot of like Normandy settling in Scotland back in the day, that's where like the word originates from. So fun fact for the day. So I've just been lying in bed reading my book, and I'm actually about to head out to go to a friend's for dinner, so I'm gonna have to put it down, but I have lots of thoughts and I'm only 50 pages in, although I think that is a fair chunk. It's about 360 odd pages, so I'm getting a feel for it, but I feel like I need some sort of like tally graphic, because what has this book done? It has indiscriminately just chucked the word ken in instead of the word no within sentences that are otherwise completely like English, as in you just wouldn't use that one individual Scots word and no other Scots like dialect or language, and it's just so funny to me. Sometimes I just feel like someone learned a Scots word to give their book authenticity, but then to me it just reads really strangely. I get that like obviously you want it to have mass appeal and be readable, but it doesn't work. That kind of just dialogue for me. What else, generally speaking, as a romance book, this is like way more dramatic than a lot of the romances I've read, and I think that's the time period it's set in. Somebody's already died, like there's some like really high stakes and sort of like alliances, which also means potential like bloodbaths and wars that could happen, and that doesn't come up a lot in the Regency romances, despite the fact that a lot of them deal with the Napoleonic Wars. You know, no one's ever really in that much danger, and you don't really expect people, even side characters, to die. So I'm like, this is dramatic, but that's fine. It's kind of, it's its setting, it's its mood, that's fine. The insta-lust is like maximum insta-lust, but also I don't mind. It's a romance book. I kind of expect that as long as their relationship is developed within the book and I'm convinced of it by the end, then that's fine. If I'm not, then obviously that's a different issue. And also, interestingly enough, I've managed to make my first Highlander romance a book not about a Highlander. Well, it is. So the woman is a Highlander, but the male is not, and I was kind of expecting all of the men in these books to be Highlanders, because I think that is more common. Like, I think more often than not it's about the kind of male Highlander. And also the title of this one literally says Forbidden Night with the Highlander, and he's not exactly. I mean, he's painted, though, really not to be a Highlander, that he's like this Norman who's grown up in England. It just feels funny because he's the one that in the storyline is not the Highlander, but the title makes you think that he is. I also thought I would continue to use this video just to share fun facts, because they briefly mentioned at the beginning of this book Gaelic, which is one of the like traditional languages of Scotland, and it's really interesting because I think people almost think that like Gaelic is like the original Scottish language, as in like from ancient times, but actually it wasn't until the sort of 10th 11th century when Gaelic became the like native language of Scotland. So from what I'm aware, when say the ancient Romans invaded Scotland, or first attempted to invade Scotland in antiquity, the language that was common was Brythonic. So I just think that's like an interesting fun fact, because the characters in the book talk about Gaelic being like their language, when really in terms of language it was quite new still when this book is set in the 12th century. However, I guess even if a language has only been around for 200 years, it still feels pretty like original and native to you. So I just think this is interesting tidbits to kind of discuss alongside the literature. But yeah, I better head off to dinner, and I will update you when I'm further into this. So we've reached the first hurdle. I'm DNFing this book, and actually it has nothing to do with any of the Scottish Highlander elements at all. I reached page 100, which sort of is like close after their first like love scene, which is made me so uncomfortable. Like, it's really hard to explain because obviously it's a feeling, but basically she thinks he's someone completely different. Like, he's lied about his identity in order to meet her, and her not to know that he is a Norman, which she would be opposed to. So she thinks he's someone completely different, and he just goes along with that and lets her think that whilst they have sex for the first time, knowing all too well that once they've had sex she will have to marry him, even though she doesn't want to marry who he really is. Like, she likes the idea of the guy that she thinks he is, and wouldn't mind marrying him to escape the marriage to the Norman, but she doesn't know that he's actually the Norman, and I can't. The manipulation is just too real, and I just found like all of her thoughts about, she just doesn't want this marriage, and everything she's doing is trying to escape it, although she's attracted to this man, and just like how horrible the thought is that she's like completely unwilling in this marriage. Like, I quite enjoy an arranged marriage trope, but when there's like respect and honesty, and that was, I just couldn't. I couldn't get on board with it. It just made me really uncomfortable, and I just kind of lost interest in the book, so I'm not going to keep reading that. And I have instead this morning, before I headed off to the gym, started a book on Scribd, which is called Highland Wedding by Hannah Howell, because that was one of the authors that was recommended to me when I asked for recommendations on Twitter. So I thought perhaps it would be better to try an author that had actually been recommended, and that one was on Scribd. So I'm currently reading that. I have literally no idea what time period it's set in because it doesn't mention it, and I couldn't see it on the blurb on Goodreads, but I guess it's sort of between like anything from 1100 to like the 1500s because it's before the Union of the Crown. So in that 400 years somewhere. And I guess that's kind of all you need. It's not a history book, so I'm gonna crack on with that and hopefully finish this one because I don't want to just DNF them all. I want to find some that I like. I'm also hoping that the other book I reserved in the library will come in the next 2 days and I can give that one a shot. And it might be better. So yeah, stick around, see what happens. I'll update you on my thoughts on the Highland wedding when I've read a little bit more. Allow me to interrupt your regularly scheduled viewing to encourage you to go and donate blood if you can. I basically just had the half day. I went to the library this morning but then had booked to go and give blood this afternoon. And since then I've just sort of come home and relaxed a little bit, and I'm going to make myself some nice food. But I thought whilst I remembered I would update you on my reading Scottish romances, Highlander romances, sorry. Because I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is I DNF'd another book and I've already forgotten what it's called. What was it called? A Highland Wedding? You'll have just seen it in the clip before, but it's already disappeared from my mind. It got DNF'd. Once again though, it had nothing to do with the fact that it was Scottish or Highlander. I just didn't like it, and I'm not going to force myself to read something I don't like. There were two main reasons I didn't like it. The first being that every single female character that was mentioned that wasn't the lead female was awful. They were all like trying to steal her man. They were all like described as promiscuous and in a bad way, as if that was like a bad way to characterize them, or they were all jealous of her or nasty, and it was just so eye-roll worthy. Like, what's with the women hate, guys? Female friendships are cool. And then there was also just this whole ridiculous subplot where she felt like she had this massive secret that she couldn't tell her fiance about, and she didn't want him to look badly on her because of it, and it was like made to be this massive big deal, and basically the big secret was that she had large breasts despite looking petite. And fair enough if she was feeling insecure, like we all have insecurities about our bodies, but it was the way that it was really laid thick and built up beforehand, and I couldn't. It took me out of the story. So I gave up on that. But the good news is, moving on from that, I have actually finished a Highlander romance. Yes, I know, I didn't even mention to you that I was reading it because I haven't updated you in a little while, but I read in a very short space of time When a Scot Ties a Knot by Tessa Dare. I decided I had to read something by an author I already knew I was going to enjoy, and Tessa Dare is one of those. She is my favourite historical romance author. I mean, she's really the one that got me into the genre, and for good reason. There's so many reasons I love her books, but one of them is how funny they are, like intentionally hilarious. They are so, so funny. And also the complexity of the female leads. Like, all of her female leads have such complex characteristics. They have varied interests, and they are much more than just their relationship to the male protagonist. And that is so important for me in a romance, and I just love her books. And this one was no different. From just like a historical romance standpoint, I really enjoyed this. Again, it made me laugh out loud. The premise is so ridiculous. It's about this woman who, they're all set during the Regency era, so sort of like usually near the end or at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, but she basically, to get out of attending events like balls, makes up a fiance and writes letters to his fiance to convince her family that they're engaged. And in her story, she's telling them he is this Highland captain serving in the British Army overseas, and she's waiting for him to return home. But when she writes these letters, they're more like diary entries because she doesn't think anyone's ever going to read them. Turns out the name she chose is a real person. Of course it is. And they have been getting to this person who turns up one day and is like, honey, I'm home. And it's so funny. I loved her agoraphobia. I mean, obviously agoraphobia is not a nice thing, but I loved how detailed it was. And Tessa Dare also tends to explore kind of like past trauma and PTSD throughout her books in like quite like a light way. Like, they're not like super dark books, but she makes that part of her characters, and I always just enjoy the way she explores childhood trauma. Now that's all well and great, this was like a 4 out of 5 star book for me, but I will say that I kind of read it differently to the other Tessa Dare I've read, and I think what I'm coming to realise is that I find it a little bit more difficult to immerse myself in these Highland romances, perhaps because having like the cultural connection to Scotland, it's part of my history, having a little bit more knowledge about the country and its past than I necessarily do to other time periods, and that takes me out of the story a little bit because I find myself overthinking everything. And one of the things that made me roll my eyes was something I mentioned near the beginning of this video that I was really not looking forward to, and that was the kind of like animosity towards the English and just the oversimplification of that relationship. So one of the themes that the book touches on is the Highland clearances, which was a period in Scottish history, really freaking awful period, basically where rich landowners started forcing out their tenants to replace them with sheep, because for them sheep were more profitable than people, and then all these people became displaced from homes that they had perhaps inhabited for generations. And it was your age-old tale of profit over people. And the book very much painted that dynamic as like an England versus Scottish thing. And at one point she does make vague reference to a real historical figure, the Duchess of Sutherland, and talks about her as this English noblewoman who took part in the Highland clearances. But she was actually like from Edinburgh. Like, this woman was just a rich Scottish woman whose parents were Scottish and from like really old Scottish clans, and I just can't get on board with that like oversimplification of like a historical dynamic, when for every English landowner that was ousting people there was a Scottish landowner as well, and it was far more of like a poor versus rich dynamic. And I didn't really intend to turn this video into like a historical lecture, but I think I'm just trying to explain how I find it difficult to completely immerse myself in these books because I'm nitpicking. Like, I can't let this stuff go. It scratches at the back of my mind and I think about it whilst I'm reading. And that is an experience that I get not everybody is going to have with these books. But if I'm going to do a video where an actual Scot reads Highlander romances, I need to explain to you where I'm coming from. However, all in all, I really enjoyed When a Scot Ties a Knot. Tessa Dare did not let me down, and I'm really hoping that whatever book I pick up next, because I haven't committed to attempt number 4, is as good, because I would like to not burn out at the end of this week and just read half of a pile of books I hate. So 1 out of 3 at the moment, and I'm gonna head off and make myself some dinner now. Okay, so I'm making some sandwiches for my lunch, and I thought I'd just update you whilst I was standing here. Productivity, multitasking. I am reading a new book, unsurprisingly, but halfway through it. It's called The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie, and I am really enjoying this one. I didn't know what I was getting in for at all, because I just picked it up because it was one of the authors that was recommended to me. And the one thing I will say is it doesn't really feel like a Highlander romance, so I'm still a bit unsure about like what are the qualifications of a Highlander romance. If it's simply like a Scottish male lead or female lead, then it does it. But thus far, the entire book has been set in London or Paris, so it's not been in Scotland. So if like what you want from a Highland romance is like, you know, descriptions of the beautiful Scottish Highlands, which I get, they're gorgeous. This has yet to be that kind of book. I don't know if they will end up in Scotland at some point. He's mentioned having like a manor in Scotland. But it's about Ian Mackenzie and this woman called Beth. Now, what I love about this book is that Beth, first and foremost, is a widow, so it's not got that whole sort of like virgin alpha male dynamic. It's kind of nice that she's been in a loving relationship before that she was really happy in, she knows what she wants, and that's really nice. And also, I didn't know going into it that Ian has autism. Now, they don't use the word in the book because the word didn't exist when this is set, which is Victorian England, end of the 1800s, but the author like talks about it. I checked on Goodreads that he is autistic, and again, I really appreciate that. I wasn't expecting this kind of representation, and so I'm just really enjoying this book. I really like Ian, I really like Beth. Ian is the Scottish one, like I mentioned, but it's not been set in the Highlands. There's not really any Scots language in it, although, as you know, I complain about that anyway, so what do you want, Jean? the only really thing that distinguishes it as a Highlander romance is he is from Scotland and he's called Mackenzie. And I did predict at the beginning of this video that all of these Scottish Highlander characters would have Mick or Mac names. So I was right. Pat on the back. I'm just really enjoying this book as a historical romance. I think it's just really good and I'm really pleased that I picked it up. So I will let you know how I get on with that one, and there's also like 10 books in the series, so if I like it, this is going to be great because I'm going to have this big long series to read. The only thing I'm thinking now is that at this point in the week I'm not going to get my library book and start it because it's like a full-length novel, and even if it comes in tomorrow I can't pick it up tomorrow, so but I would like to try at least one more book, and what I would like is to find a Highlander romance that I like, so not like the two that I DNF'd, but that has a Scottish woman in it, because I get that the genre as a whole generally kind of focuses on like men in kilts and like that's the thing, but as a Scottish woman I kind of want to read about a female protagonist that is Scottish. That would be really nice. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a deep dive in picking my next book and try and make sure I find one like that and that hopefully I enjoy. But that's kind of my plan, to finish this book, which I'm really enjoying, and then to find one with a Scottish female lead that I really enjoy as well. I mean, obviously I want to enjoy all my reading, but given the first two books I'm a little bit dubious, but yeah. So now I'm gonna go eat my sandwiches. Hopefully you enjoyed this update and I will see you in the next one. So update, I have finished The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie and I really enjoyed it. Just from the perspective of a historical romance that had complex lead characters, an interesting relationship, a bit of like a side plot that there was this mystery from Ian's past and Beth got embroiled in helping figure all out. And it just worked overall. They did end up in Scotland, for those of you that were curious, for a point in the novel. Everyone there was ginger. Which of course is a bit of a stereotype, although interestingly enough Scotland I believe does have the highest sort of density of redheads of anywhere else, but otherwise it was really good fun, and I'm definitely going to continue on with the series, which is good because I'm getting through Tessa Dare books and I want to have other historical romance writers that I can easily turn to for like a good fun read, and I think that this may be one of those, so I'm glad I did this video even if just for that. I've also started another book, and this one's a bit shorter, it's around 200 pages. It's called Mad for Love by Elizabeth Essex. Now I'm a little bit invested because I want to love this book for a particular reason, and that is that book 2 in this series is about a female Robin Hood type who lives in Edinburgh and steals from the rich and gives to the poor, and I'm just so here for that concept. It sounds like so much fun, you know, it's set in my home city. She's like, oh yeah, I mean I want to read that, so I want to enjoy this in order to carry on with the series. And at the moment I am enjoying it. This one's a bit of a heist novel, so we have a French female lead whose father is an art forger, and for a reason that you find out in the book, she needs to steal a statue from an exhibit in Somerset House in London. So she enlists the help of a man that she believes to be like a criminal when actually he's like an aristocrat. These are the kind of misunderstandings that happen when aristocrats break into your house. Now, what makes this a Highlander romance? We've kind of stumbled into the same territory as the previous book in that I think the entirety of this narrative is going to be set in London, because I'm already halfway through and we're still in London and there's still so much to happen there, and it is surrounding this heist which is in London, but the male lead is Scottish. However, this is the thing that's annoying me and I just don't understand. The female lead keeps referring to him as an Englishman. She's like, you English, or your English ways, or you Englishman, and he doesn't correct her even though she does it to his face as well, and I'm like, here, what's the point? Like, why have you got a Scottish male lead if you're just going to keep calling him an Englishman, even if it is because the protagonist is mistaken? But it's just kind of exhausting. And she doesn't call him like British, which would make fine, that would make sense, Scotland's in Britain. She just keeps calling him English, and I'm like, but we've been told he's Scottish. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So all in all, I'm not really sure if this one really falls into the Highlander romance category, unless you count the male protagonist occasionally using the words ye and yer instead of you and your, which is the only nod to his Scottish heritage really at all. But it is the first in a series with more of a Scottish focus, although, I mean, in saying that, now that I think about it, how can you really call it a Highland romance when it's set in Edinburgh either? You can't, because Edinburgh isn't in the Highlands. Scotland is divided into the Highlands and the Lowlands, and Edinburgh is in the Lowlands. So actually now I think about it, even book 2 is not really a Highlander romance. This is where I feel like I'm being very particular about the genre title when other people are probably just using it very, very loosely to refer to like romances with Scottish characters in them. But in saying that, I am enjoying the story. I think it's good fun, the characters are fun, and if it continues to just be this kind of light-hearted fun, then I will probably read the next book in the series, although not in this video because we're coming to the end and I'm getting a little bit exhausted. I think just reading anything so specific and so much of it in a short space of time is a little bit exhausting in terms of your ability to read that genre. So at this rate, I'm not really sure I'm going to find a Scottish romance I like with a Scottish female lead, although give me a chance, maybe tonight will be the night. But if I do just finish this video having DNF'd 2 books and finished 3 books, I'm not going to complain, so we shall see, but stick around to find out. And thus my final book is complete. I just finished the short novella that I mentioned earlier and enjoyed it. Like, it was good fun. It was short. The plot line was like a bit of a like uproarious adventure which had me laughing, and I really enjoy that. I think a little bit of comedy is something I look for in my romances, particularly my historical romances. I will still say though, like, this man, who actually interestingly enough is the only male or only Scottish character so far in any of these books who didn't have a Mick or Mac surname, so well done for originality, they do exist. However, he's still from Edinburgh, and if he's from Edinburgh, he is neither a Highlander nor an Englishman, both of the things the book suggests that he is. But it was good fun, and fun enough that I would read the next book in the series, which is more of a full-length novel and hopefully a bit more like meaty. So I like good introduction to a new author, but none of it was set in Scotland, and from what I gather, if you're into the Highland romance genre, you would perhaps be looking for something a little bit more than this book offered. It's more of your traditional historical romance. This one specifically, I don't know if I mentioned, was set in the late 1700s during the French Revolution, but in England. And yeah, so I think I am going to take a little moment and update you in the morning with my final thoughts on this entire project, and I'll see you then. I just want to say that I know this sounds ridiculous, but I don't know what to read now that I've finished reading so much Highland romance that I'm just considering reading another one. So it is officially wrap up time, but before we get on to chatting about my overall thoughts on this experience, I did want to let you know that I did actually end up reading one more book. It was actually more of a short story. It was about 38 pages long, so I feel like book's probably an exaggeration. But last minute I decided to treat myself to a little ebook on Kindle that was 99p by Alyssa Cole. Now Alyssa Cole's actually a romance author I've heard a lot about, but the books I usually hear talked about are kind of modern royalty romances, and that's not my cup of tea. I don't really like modern royalty books. This, however, was a Highlander romance I'd never heard of before. It was called Agnes Moore's Wild Night, and it is about a young black woman in the court of James IV, King of Scotland, and a like Highland chief who fall in love upon first sight. Like, it's 38 pages long, you've got to just accept complete and utter insta-love in this case. And it was a really sweet little story, very short, so I don't really know what else to say about it, but I have no complaints. It was just like a little fun, quick read to wrap everything up. And with that, I think I've officially chatted to you about 4 books which I finished and 2 books which I DNF'd. I did try to start another book that was recommended to me called Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. However, I just couldn't get into this. I don't have any specific complaints. Maybe I was just feeling a little bit burnt out, but I just wasn't getting into the storyline. It maybe just wasn't for me. So I don't really have any thoughts on that. I just thought I'd mention that I did try to find a book with a female Highlander lead character, and it just didn't come about. And one thing I did note reading all of these books is that I just generally seem to prefer historical romances that are set in the 1800s, either like the Regency or Victorian eras, and I can't quite pinpoint why, and it's maybe just based on what I've read as opposed to necessarily preferring that. I've maybe just read more books that fall into that time period that I've enjoyed, but overall that's a tendency I'm just noting in my historical romance reading. Now specifically in regards to the Highlander romance genre, something I hadn't really considered before going into this video is that Highlander in the romance genre kind of is used synonymously with Scottish, although as we've discussed, given the Highland, Lowland separation of Scotland, it's not a synonym for a Scottish person or Scottish romance fiction, or at least it shouldn't be. But I was reading books that described men and women as Highlanders, or had Highlander in the title or in the series title, but were not about men or women actually from the Highlands, and they were maybe from the Lowlands of Scotland, which is interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before going into this. I guess the word Highlander just conjures up quite a vivid image in one's mind that those outside of Scotland are drawn to for whatever reason, and that's why it gets used like that. It's also interesting because the vast majority of books I came across and then ended up reading were by American authors. I've yet to find a Highlander romance by a Scottish author, which is interesting. And although there were some books on this list I didn't really enjoy, there were others that I thoroughly did and will therefore be reading more by those authors. So I'm pleased to have come away with that, if nothing else. In particular, I think my favourite is The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. Now this book isn't perfect by any means, but I loved the two main protagonists so much that kind of became the central focus for my love of this book. Ian and Beth were so wonderful as protagonists. So that's definitely my favourite book of this whole reading experience, and probably the one I'd recommend most highly. And maybe one of the reasons I loved The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie so much is that there wasn't a lot to bring me out of the storyline. For example, there wasn't a ton of Scots blended in with the dialogue, and it's not that I don't want that. I do want to see Scots in books, but I almost would prefer it not to be there than to be done badly, because then for me as a reader it takes me out of the story. I get for other readers who perhaps aren't familiar with Scots, it might just make it more atmospheric, but for me it doesn't work so much. And the only thing I would really say coming away from this experience is that there are some great books out there in the Highlander romance genre, even if that is used to mean all of Scotland. But I think some of the authors could benefit from just having a few people read their books before publishing them that are actually Scottish or have a background in Scottish history. And I myself have just accepted I'm going to be more nitpicky than necessarily a non-Scot would be. However, I'm super excited to continue on with the sequels to The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. I'm intrigued to give the sequel to Mad for Love a shot, and overall this was a really fun experience, even if I did get inside my own head a little bit on occasion. So I would love to chat to you in the comments down below. I have been filming this video for a week and really wishing I had the other voice to chat back to, because it's obviously just been me and my camera, and I really wanted to have a back and forth. So now is that opportunity, and I'm really excited to have that with you. Have you read any of these books? Have you read any other Highlander romances that you recommend? Or generally speaking, when it comes to romantic literature, what are your favourite subgenres? I would love to hear about them. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!